President Trump's first week is in the books, and Washington is playing catch-up. We'll analyze the executive orders and how the president is being received with Fox News political anchor Bret Baier is here. And later, we'll explore the president's actions on immigration and the religious blowback with House Judiciary Committee member Jim Sensenbrenner. And finally, what of the president's plan to repeal and replace Obamacare? Will it be simultaneous? House Budget Committee Chairman DIANE Black joins us. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Bret Baier, Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner, and Congresswoman DIANE Black are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. I'll be live tweeting throughout the show, or you can email us at worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get started. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. On Wednesday, President Trump signed executive actions on immigration, which he says will result in the United States getting control of its border starting today.
The Secretary of Homeland Security, working with myself and my staff, will begin immediate construction of a border wall. So badly needed. You folks know how badly needed it is. As a help, but very badly needed. This will also help Mexico by deterring illegal immigration from Central America and by disrupting violent cartel networks. As I've said repeatedly to the country, we are going to get the bad ones out, the criminals and the drug deals and gangs and gang members and cartel leaders. The day is over when they can stay in our country and wreak havoc.
President Trump also ordered the creation of more detention centers for the processing of illegals crossing the border. He added more federal border control agents, and the federal government will withhold grants from so-called sanctuary cities that do not comply with immigration law. Moreover, Trump announced that his administration will be working in partnership with Mexico to improve safety and economic opportunity for both countries. And Pope Francis said in an interview this past weekend that he's taking a wait-and-see approach before judging the new American president. He warned that populism could lead to a new Hitler. Speaking to the Spanish daily El País, he said of that emerging populism in Europe that it brings to mind the classic example of Germany in 1933. Germans, he said, wanted to protect themselves with walls and barbed wire so the country could have its identity back. Adolf Hitler said, "I can do it." Pope Francis did underline that it was too early to judge Trump. In a congratulatory note before the inauguration, the Holy Father urged Mr. Trump to show concern for the poor, the outcast, and those in need who, quote, stand before our door. An apparent reference to refugees and migrants. On the pro-life front, President Trump is holding off on announcing his pick for the U.S. Supreme Court until next week. As part of his first set of executive orders, he reinstituted a federal funding ban on international aid groups that perform, procure, or provide information on abortions. Known as the Mexico City policy, the regulation was instituted in 1984 by President Ronald Reagan. At the White House on Monday, Press Secretary Sean Spicer was asked if more pro-life measures are to be expected from the new president.
Well, I think the president, it's no secret, has made it very clear that he's a pro-life president. He wants to stand up for all Americans, including the unborn. And I think the reinstatement of this policy is not just something that echoes that value, but respects taxpayer funding as well.
And the U.S. House of Representatives voted this week to permanently ban taxpayer funding of elective abortions. For the past 40 years, Congress has regularly voted for a year-to-year funding ban known as the Hyde Amendment. Besides not being permanent, there were loopholes in the Hyde Amendment. Just 3 Democrats joined Republicans in supporting the legislation. The bill now moves to the Senate. We'll discuss more about it later in the show. And a new expose video from the pro-life group Live Action shows Planned Parenthood refusing prenatal care to women. Live Action investigators called on 97 Planned Parenthood clinics to ask about prenatal care. They were turned away 92 times, the pro-life group said.
Hi, I was hoping to make an appointment for prenatal care.
For what type of service?
Prenatal care, pregnancy care.
We don't have prenatal care here. Planned Parenthood offers abortion, so they don't offer prenatal care.
To justify the $500 million in taxpayer dollars received annually by Planned Parenthood, Cecile Richards, the president and CEO of the organization, has said repeatedly that its patients depend on Planned Parenthood for prenatal care. Its leaders claim that being defunded would hurt millions of women who need prenatal care, breast exams, and birth control. Live Action plans to release more videos in the coming weeks. And at the Vatican, Pope Francis asked for and received the resignation of leader of the Knights of Malta, Grand Master Fra Matthew Festing. The Catholic lay order became subject to a papal investigation after it fired one of its leaders. Festing had refused to cooperate with a papal commission investigating the ouster of the former Grand Chancellor over revelations that the Knights' charity had distributed condoms during his watch. The Vatican intervention is extraordinary, as Malta is a sovereign order which runs a vast charity network around the globe. After meeting with the Pope on Tuesday, Festing decided to resign. Complicating the situation, the Vatican announced that they were appointing a papal delegate to the order. Here to shed light on this situation and what it all means is a member of the papal posse and chaplain to the Knights of Malta, Father Jerry Murray. Father, thank you for being with us.
Good to be with you, Raymond.
Father, does the Pope have the right to accept the resignation of the Grand Master of Malta and pressure him to resign?
Well, strictly speaking, the Pope does not have the legal authority to accept the resignation of the Grand Master because he neither appointed nor approved the election of the Grand Master. The Grand Master was elected by the Sovereign Council of the Order of Malta, because Malta, the Order of Malta, is a sovereign entity. So unlike any other religious order, it has its own juridical existence apart from the Holy See's oversight. It's a unique institution in the history of the Church, and the sovereignty has been a question that's been debated over the centuries. But strictly speaking, the Pope, he can ask the Grand Master to resign. Pope can ask any Catholic to do things the Pope thinks he should do. But strictly speaking, the resignation is offered to the Sovereign Council, and the Sovereign Council will then accept it.
Some are suggesting, Father Jerry, that this is really about the cardinal patron of Malta, Cardinal Raymond Burke, who's been in a public debate with the Pope over teaching regarding divorced and remarried Catholics receiving communion. Do you think there's any truth to that? And what does this tell us about the Pope's concern for a charitable order distributing condoms abroad?
Well, Cardinal Burke's role, he does not run the Order of Malta. He is the cardinal patron, which means he's the Pope's representative to the order, to be a point of contact and to help guide them in religious matters. As far as I can see, the problem here has been between what the Grand Master did in firing the number 3 in the order, because he was responsible for a program of aid in the Far East that included immoral activities, the giving condoms and other contraceptive means under the aegis of the Order of Malta's charitable action. And the Grand Master was not happy about that. There was an investigation done. This wasn't a matter of an overnight decision on his part. And once that information was presented to the Grand Master by those who investigated it, he felt that he had to take this step. Now, the Holy See, through Cardinal Parolin, expressed displeasure with this action, and then the Pope established a commission that was going to investigate what happened, and the order said no. We're sovereign. This is a matter of governance. This is a matter of our independent existence as a sovereign entity. We control how we monitor and supervise those who work in our organization. And it's kind of stunning because that committee was formed and their work hasn't been completed, even though the Grand Magistrate, the Grand Master, and the Sovereign Council said they wouldn't cooperate with it. The committee went ahead and started its work. And even before that's done, the Pope asked for his resignation. So it's something that I find very troubling as a chaplain of the order and as a canon lawyer also, because this essentially is a Vatican takeover of the Order of Malta. By appointing a delegate, the Pope is now saying that he's in charge of the Order of Malta, and its sovereignty, in effect, disappears, because sovereignty means we decide for ourselves how we structure our government ruling structure and class, and in this case, a Grand Master and the Sovereign Council. A Grand Master is now gone, or will be gone if his resignation is accepted, and the Sovereign Council is told that they're going to have an outsider becoming the ruler of the order. I'm very troubled by that.
Very good. Father Jerry Murray, we'll see how this story develops in the days ahead. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Raymond.
And here in the U.S., a couple of bishops appear to be thwarting two of Pope Benedict's outreach initiatives to disaffected Anglicans and those devoted to the traditional Latin Mass. Starting in Rockford, Illinois, Bishop David Malloy has instructed priests in his diocese that they must now ask permission before offering the traditional form of the Mass. The order appears to directly contravene Pope Benedict's 2007 motu proprio, Summorum Pontificum, which removed the need for priests to ask for and receive an indult from a bishop to perform the Latin Mass. According to the letter issued earlier this month, Bishop Malloy said there was a need for liturgical unity. In the same vein, Bishop Malloy has also outlawed the ad orientem posture, that is, the priest facing the altar during any Mass. Just last year, the ad orientem practice was encouraged by Cardinal Robert Sarah, the prefect of the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments. And in San Antonio, Archbishop Gustavo Garcia Siller has removed the pastor of an Anglican youth parish who was seeking to have his congregation leave the diocese and join the ordinariate created by Pope Benedict for former Anglicans. Father Christopher Phillips of Our Lady of the Atonement Parish was removed for, quote, pastoral concerns. The Archbishop noted concerns, again, over unity. By way of background, Anglican youth parishes and the ordinariates created by Pope Benedict allow for the retention of certain elements of the Anglican liturgy while still being fully Roman Catholic. Father Phillips, a former Episcopalian who was ordained to the Catholic Church in the 1980s, is popular among parishioners and credited with growing the parish school. In a one-page letter to parishioners, Archbishop Garcia Siller noted his concerns about expressions in the life of the parish that indicate an identity separate from, rather than simply unique, among the parishes of the Archdiocese. According to reports, parishioners believe that Father Phillips was removed to prevent the parish from its longtime plan of leaving the Archdiocese for the Houston-based ordinariate of the Chair of St. Peter. And Opus Dei has a new leader. Pope Francis this week confirmed the election of Monsignor Fernando Ocadis Brana as the prelate. Monsignor Ocadis has been the auxiliary and longtime vicar general under the previous prelate, Bishop Echevarria, who died last month at the age of 84. A worldwide prelature now headquartered in Rome, Opus Dei has more than 90,000 members, including some 2,000 priests. And Oscar nominations were announced this week. Leading the pack with a whopping 14 nominations was the neo-Hollywood musical La La Land. A favorite to win Best Picture this year, La La Land's 14 nods tie it with Titanic and All About Eve for the most Oscar nominations for a single film. Also making a strong showing was Mel Gibson's Hacksaw Ridge. The World War II epic pulled in 6 nominations, including Best Picture, Best Director for Gibson, and a Best Actor nod for Andrew Garfield. If you like musicals featuring non-singers and dancers desperately trying to emulate great talent of the past, then La La Land is for you. Oh, and there were a lot of other films nominated, but you didn't see them. The 2017 Academy Awards ceremony airs February 26th. Catch up on all the latest nods there. As some of you know, the sequel to my Will Wilder book for young readers, Will Wilder, The Lost Staff of Wonders, hits bookstores on March 7th. Now, you can pre-order it now at Amazon.com, EWTNRC.com, Barnes & Noble, and your local independent store. The first book, Will Wilder, The Relic of Perilous Falls, will be available in paperback and hardback on March 7th. And for a limited time, if you pre-order either book now and send me a receipt or confirmation of purchase, I'll send you a signed book plate and a limited edition bookmark. Email me at Raymond@RaymondArroyo.com for your signed book plate and bookmark. Write Will Wilder 2 in the subject line. Be sure to include your address, and we'll make sure your book is properly adorned. When we return, Donald Trump is now the 45th President of the United States. We'll discuss the mood here in D.C. and the new president's inaugural with Fox News chief political anchor Bret Baier. The World Over continues in a moment. Stay right there.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Welcome back to The World Over. That was the 34th U.S. President, Dwight Eisenhower, from his farewell address in 1961. As we move from Obama to the Trump presidency, are there similarities between these two transitions of power? My next guest is the chief political anchor at Fox News and the host of Special Report. He's written a terrific new book. It's called 3 Days in January, Dwight Eisenhower's Final Mission, dealing with the last days of Ike's presidency. Please welcome back to the program, Bret Baier. Great to see you, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with the Trump inaugural before we talk about this book, because I do see a lot of shadows and similarities here that we should point out, and lessons maybe to be derived.
Yeah.
Let's start with the Trump inaugural. It got mixed reviews because of particularly this section.
Too many of our citizens, a different reality exists. Mothers and children trapped in poverty in our inner cities. Rusted out factories scattered like tombstones across the landscape of our nation. An education system flush with cash, but which leaves our young and beautiful students deprived of all knowledge. And the crime, and the gangs, and the drugs that have stolen too many lives and robbed our country of so much unrealized potential. This American carnage stops right here and stops right now.
Some said this was Jacksonian. Others say it was just blunt Trump talk. Your take?
I don't think it was reaching out to any former president. I think this was Donald Trump in a souped-up campaign speech, inaugural address type campaign speech, that is what they wanted to deliver, because that is what he campaigned on, and that is what he was delivering. You know, he is a non-politician, somebody who is pretty plain-spoken, doesn't have an ideology per se.
Right.
And in that sense, he's a little bit like Eisenhower. He was the last politician who we elected who was not a politician. He was had not held office. America first. You know, I think some people were scared of that in a populist sense, but for his supporters and what they went through in the campaign, this is about shaking up Washington and redoing the establishment hold on this place.
Now, in your book, you, and I don't want to get too far ahead of us, but Eisenhower clearly was always stressing bipartisanship and the need to work together.
Yeah.
Did Donald Trump miss an opportunity to do that and to sort of unify the country after this fractious election?
There may have been more hat tips to the Democrats. He later did that in the lunch speech where he recognized Secretary Clinton and former President Clinton. I think that there will be times where he's going to need Democrats to sign on to big initiatives, much like Eisenhower did. And I think that was not what that inaugural address was for. It was for laying out his vision and kind of stirring up the establishment pot.
Well, after a rocky weekend, it looks like, after they were debating crowd numbers, who watched the inaugural, who didn't, the first couple of days here have been pretty good ones for Donald Trump. These executive orders, which I'd like to kind of run through.
Sure.
Your take on what they mean and how they resonate, not only with his base, but with the rest of the country. First, there was the canceling TPP. This seems to have been a winner across the board.
Yeah, not for establishment Republicans who believe in that vehicle for trade, but for the people who signed on to Trump, for the Bernie Sanders supporters, for people who feel like they've been getting bad deal out of trade deals. They think that this is their champion.
Well, the union guys this week who had that meeting with him, they were singing his praise. It said the most important meeting, maybe the best meeting they've ever had in their careers.
So think of another Republican, Raymond, who would do that on their first official day, bring in the unions and let them talk about how they feel about the prospect of a Trump presidency. I mean, that's not your typical Republican.
Yeah, but great politics, really smart politics. Let's talk about the hiring freeze. He has this hiring freeze across the federal government, doesn't touch emergency responders and military. A good first bell to ring for his base?
Sure. Well, not necessarily his base, but the conservatives who really fear that he's going to be a big government president. And so this gives them the signal that, hey, we're concerned about deficits and debt as well.
And then there was a reinstatement of the Mexico City policy. This is almost, at this point, a presumptive early executive order. Bush did it. Bush 1 did it. Obama reversed it. And now you have President Trump reinstating the Mexico City policy, which does what, and why is this important?
It prevents funding for any advertising or promotion of abortion overseas. And this is just a signal to social conservatives. If you think about the 81+%, I think it might have been 84% evangelicals who voted for Donald Trump, more voted for Donald Trump than voted for George W. Bush in 2004. This is, I hear you, I'm a pro-life president, and I'm going to live up to that.
He's meeting this week with Theresa May, the Prime Minister of Britain. He called himself during the campaign Mr. Brexit. How important is this meeting, and is the United States' relationship with the UK in this post-EU reality for them?
Well, I think it's a big deal. I think they're going to talk about the possibilities of one-on-one trade. And if you think about the geopolitical chess game that happens with the EU and this meeting, it's significant. The same undercurrent that that had Brexit pass in Great Britain is similar to what we saw here. It's a earth-shattering kind of establishment-breaking vote.
While we're talking about trade, I should have asked you this earlier on the TPP. Some are saying that by invalidating an agreement like that, you strengthen the hand of China. That the reason those 12 nations came together was to create an Asian bloc that would be an opponent, an opposite to China and the dominance of China in the region. Did Donald Trump strengthen China by destroying the TPP, ripping it up?
I mean, the critics say that that's what happens. I think that they have yet to see how President Trump deals with this negotiation-wise. He's a deal maker, and he listens to a lot of people. Fred Smith from FedEx is fighting for China to be reconsidered as a big player in this administration. And I don't think the jury's out as far as how it's going to play.
Let's talk also, Sean Spicer got into this at the press conference the other day, I guess almost as an afterthought. The president once again said, and we heard this during the campaign, or the lead up to the campaign, he was concerned that people have voted illegally in his own election that elected him. And we'll watch this back and forth with Spicer.
I think he stated his concerns of voter fraud and people voting illegally during the campaign, and he continues to maintain that belief based on studies and evidence that people have presented to him.
But exactly what evidence?
I-
Speaker Ryan today said there's no evidence. The National Association of Secretaries of State say that they don't agree with the president's assessment. What evidence do you have?
As I said, I think the president has believed that for a while based on studies and information he has.
Is this the kind of debate that this administration should be having at this point?
I mean, it's not for me to say what debates they should get in or not get in. Clearly, they have their thought process about what works. Traditionally, this does not. This kind of focus on things that demonstrably could be proven, at least on statistics, to not be true when you talk to the individual states. Barring some other evidence coming forward, it seems like an interesting focus, and a lot of people in that room were focused on that. I will say this, that the fact that these moments, the crowd size, this illegal vote, the MLK bust back and forth, it makes the left's heads explode. And sometimes there's an overreach there to write or do stories that then makes President Trump sympathetic to his base even more, and to more people who think the press is out of touch. I mean, it's a strange cycle.
Counterintuitive kind of thing.
He's done that as a candidate on the campaign trail. He's sucked the oxygen out of the room by saying some really interesting things.
Yeah, and doing bold things that are unexpected, so we'll see how this plays out. One of the final things I want to touch on before we get to Ike, Pope Francis over the weekend did an interview with a Spanish daily, and in it, when the question of Donald Trump came up, he said, well, you know, these populist movements we have to be careful of. They can lead to a Hitler-like leader. Now, he wasn't saying Donald Trump is Hitler, but it has been interpreted and played that way. Your thoughts on the Pope wading in to this kind of thought and idea?
Yeah, I think it's dangerous for a former altar boy to be judging the Holy Father on
make that true.
Yeah, so on what he says. I will say this broadly, in that any comparison that goes down this road opens up critics who go to that place. He finished by saying, we don't know what's going to happen with Donald Trump. Let's see. But you know, the checks and balances in the U.S. with the Supreme Court and Congress and the presidency often gets overlooked when talking broadly about this. It was eye-opening. It was kind of eyebrow-raising. But again, as the former altar boy, I defer to...
the papal pundit.
Yes.
He's sort of expanding the role. The Keys of Peter apparently opened many doors, more than we expected. Let's talk about your book, 3 Days in January. Why Eisenhower, of all people? This had its origins in Augusta, Georgia.
I did, yeah. I
Tell
got
people about
the
it.
holy grail of golf invites, and I'm a golfer. I played golf in college, and I went down to Augusta, and they told me I was staying in the Eisenhower cabin, and I was really excited. I was ready for the round. I couldn't sleep, and I poured myself a glass of wine, and I walked around the cabin, which is really like a little White House. And I realized, as somebody who covers politics in Washington, I didn't know that much about President Eisenhower. I knew about General Eisenhower in World War II. And I thought, I'm going to take this opportunity to explore it and maybe breathe life into it. And find out about our 34th president. So I went out to Abilene, Kansas, and the museum and the boyhood home. And if you haven't been there, it's worth the trip. It takes a little while to get there, but it's a great place.
Wow.
And that's where I discovered pretty amazing stuff about this president.
Yeah, well, tell me about the two terms of Eisenhower. He really bridges the gap between World War II and Camelot. And as you said, most of us, because he was such a big war hero, we kind of overlook the contributions of this president.
Right. So he takes over in a very dangerous time.
Right.
It's the threat of Soviet expansion, nuclear war, obviously.
And here we are again.
And he has a steady hand on the till. He keeps us safe. He gets us out of Korea. The economy is booming. He passes the first civil rights legislation. He passes a massive bipartisan highway act that creates the interstate system we drive on today. He puts "under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance. Puts "in God we trust" as our national motto. And after the Korean War, Not a single soldier dies in combat under President Eisenhower's time in office. And the final mission I talk about is his farewell address, where you played at the beginning.
Which we heard at the top,
That he's laying a warning to his successor, but also a blueprint for America of what he thinks we should focus on. And bipartisanship, concern about deficit and debt, and that military-industrial complex.
And didn't he want to call it something else? Didn't it? It was tell us what he wanted to call it.
Military-industrial congressional complex.
Meaning what?
Meaning that Congress is a big part of this whole cycle. In other words, these companies have tentacles into our government through lobbyists and lawmakers. Those lawmakers make policy.
And the revolving door.
They leave and they head up a company or are on a board. So he was worried about that cycle, and you could have read that today and still been a factor.
Talk about the faith of Eisenhower, which frankly I knew almost nothing of. I mean, I knew he had written, I remember in some of the speeches there were biblical quotes, and they did have, sort of a biblical quality. Tell us about his personal faith.
Yeah, he grew up in a very religious-based family in Abilene, Kansas. Born in Texas, grew up in Kansas. They were Mennonites, River Brethren, and then they were Jehovah's Witnesses. And then he gets baptized Presbyterian once he is actually in office. But he doesn't wear his faith on his sleeve that much. It does factor into his life. He calls it the guiding light that gets him through dark times as general. He writes about it. And his first inaugural in 1953, the opening, he's worried, believe it or not, back then they were worried that this general was taking control. And they were worried how dangerous it could be for a general. So he wants to unify people, and he sits in the pew next to Mamie and scribbles the opening, which is a prayer. And he reads the prayer, asks people to bow their head, and reads the prayer as the opening to his inaugural address.
Wow. And he was the first president to do so, to compose his own prayer.
Yes.
Wow. What did you make, just to tie the bow around this? There was a lot of religiosity and evidence before Trump's swearing in.
Yeah.
I can't remember a series of pastors praying before an inaugural like this. Usually one, but a series of them was interesting. And even when he swore his staff in the other day, he invoked faith in God. We have to have faith in each other and faith in God. Your thoughts on this? Donald Trump himself, not a man particularly comfortable wearing his faith on his sleeve. Is that odd to you, or do you think that's a deliberate choice?
Not odd. I think he has come to realize, and Eisenhower wrote, that you can't take on the power and the burden of this office without some help from the person upstairs. And I think that maybe that is sinking in. I do think that his outreach and his realization how much evangelicals, Catholics, others played a role in his election, factored into the rollout of all of the pre-speech prayers and mentions that happened at the inauguration.
Tell me the similarities and the differences between these two men. Obviously, as you mentioned earlier, neither of them are politicians, but one had the advantage of being a war hero and a military leader and a strategist who understood the global picture. What lessons can be derived, and what are the differences and similarities?
Neither are politicians. They both have great name recognition. They both come into office as not tied to their party, really. They're non-ideological. They're more practical, get things across the finish line. In that sense, there is a unity in how they look at things, a commonality. But their tone and tenor is a lot different. Ike's leadership style was the hidden hand. He was a bridge player, and he didn't want to put his cards down. And I think, obviously, President Trump we have yet to see, but with the Twitter account, he's much more forward-leaning, and his might be a focus on the hand over here while something else happens back here. And that, in essence, is very different.
Now, you've golfed with the president, President Trump.
Yes, a couple years ago.
What did you see there that gives you insight? What can we learn from that?
He wants to win. He always wants to win, and that's what drives him. And if you think about it, he is a winner. And pretty much what he sets his mind to, he figures it out. Now, people don't necessarily all agree on the path he chooses to get to that victory, but he manages to win. And think about from the escalator down in June 2015
Unbelievable.
to the hand on the Bible just the other day. He won, and we'll see if he wins in the presidential rankings.
Before I let you go, the relationship with the press is already emerging here. There is some hostility. I mean, you know, the Trump team seems to have their dukes up. Smart posture, or might there have been another way to play this?
For him, it's the fight, it is the battle, and I think they are choosing to do this. We'll see how it plays out. As you know, the media is not really a loved institution around America, so
ourselves exempted.
Yeah, they have an upper hand as far as the perception of us.
What do you think of them opening up the White House press room to those regional reporters via Skype? Good idea?
Great. I think it's great. The more the merrier, I think. And the better access to people around the country. You know, Eisenhower was a huge fan of opening up and being transparent. He is the first president who puts on the record presidential news conferences. Before that, you couldn't quote the president directly. You had to paraphrase. And he is the first one who has a live news conference, the first time reporters question the president of the United States live to the American people.
I learned so much from this book. I truly felt ignorant after I finished it, because there is so much that he contributed to the national scene that we still consider part of our lives today. Much to be gleaned here, including his wisdom and the warnings he offered to JFK, and I think to all of us. Bret Baier, thank you for being here.
Raymond.
The book is 3 Days in January, Dwight Eisenhower's Final Mission by Bret Baier. It's available at bookstores everywhere and online. Grab it. And it really gives you also a real sense into the heart and faith of this man. That was something else that had eluded me. Bret Baier, thanks for being here.
Thanks a lot.
When we return, we'll examine the immigration executive orders of the new president. Can he do this alone? Wisconsin Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner joins us when The World Over continues. Stay right there.
A nation without borders is not a nation. Beginning today, the United States of America gets back control of its borders.
Welcome back to The World Over. There have been a flurry of executive orders issued this week on everything from immigration to refugee policy, as well as the promised border wall. To discuss the effect these actions could have on our national security and the new president's possible Supreme Court nominees is the chair of the Immigration and Border Security Subcommittee in the House of Representatives, Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner. Congressman, welcome to the program. I want to get right into these executive orders the president signed on Wednesday. One would tighten up the border and makes good on his promise to build the wall. He talked about the wall. Here's the question. Who's going to pay for it? Mexico says they're not.
Mexican government isn't, but I think there's a way we can get it paid for simply by forfeiting the assets of drug lords who are here. So that runs into the millions and billions of dollars, and I think that will do the trick.
What do you make of this idea, and I've read this in some of the press accounts, that this has already been authorized, the building of the wall, and they claim back in the Bush era, it was authorized, it was built, and it's complete. There's fencing all along that border. Is that true?
No, it's not true. Anybody who says that is trying to ignore the problem of all of the violence that occurs along the border now that the wall will end up stopping. It was authorized in the Secure Fence Act of 2006. It was never fully funded. It was never completely built. And there are some places where the wall cannot be patrolled. We got to make sure that the wall is patrolled, because an unpatrolled wall or fence means that people can bust holes in them, dig under them, or jump over them, and nobody will catch them. What is really important is what the president has said is that there's been a lot of violence along the border. There have been people who have been killed on both sides of the border. And by stopping the flow of illegal immigrants across the border, we will be able to lower the number of people who are killed or maimed, or hopefully eliminate them altogether.
Let's talk about the increase in ICE officers and his executive actions would defund these sanctuary cities. There are many of them, major cities across the United States, Chicago, L.A., New Orleans. How can you enforce this? Isn't that your responsibility, Congress?
Well, partially our responsibility, partially the president's. One of the things we can do is to say, if you are a sanctuary city and you refuse to allow your local law enforcement to enforce federal law that applies everywhere in the country, then you're going to start losing some of your federal funding. Money talks. And by withholding some or all of the money for people who will not cooperate with ICE agents in terms of identifying illegal immigrants, particularly the criminal illegal immigrants that the president wants to get out of here as soon as possible, which is a good move, then they ought to pay the price for it.
5,000 border agents added under this executive order. Is that enough? What about the local agents? I mean, it's a local enforcement that you need, not only border agents, right?
Well, one of the things that I advocate, is to allow local law enforcement to enforce the federal immigration law. And there's been a lot of pushback by the illegal immigrant lobby, so to speak, saying that we shouldn't allow the local cops to enforce federal law. Well, it's a federal offense to rob a bank, and you don't wait for the FBI to show up when the bank's being robbed. The local police and sheriff's deputies come and try to nail a person who's robbing the bank and then turn them over to the feds for prosecution.
Let's talk about the refugee crisis. There was a lot of pushback, and there will be in the days ahead, against the president. You'll remember during the campaign, he said there needed to be extreme vetting of refugees. With this executive order, it appears that what he's doing is saying, we're going to take a time out on some of these refugees, reappraise the process, which is what President Bush did in the wake of 9/11, and that from those coming from these hot spots may not be permitted in. A good idea?
It's an excellent idea. First of all, under our law and a UN convention, an economic migrant is not a refugee. A refugee is someone who has a well-founded fear of religious or political persecution should they return home. The Syrian Christians are probably the outstanding example of people who would qualify as refugees. And we ought to make them welcome here because they are being harassed. A lot of them are being murdered. And even the Holy Father has said that there is a genocide going on against Christians in Syria and certain other places in the Middle East. That's the type of people that we have welcomed in the United States throughout the centuries, rather than people who claim they're refugees and want to come here simply because the grass is greener on our side of the fence.
And there is a religious carve-out in this executive action, it appears.
Yes, the president has recognized that. However, President Obama refused to because only a tiny percentage of the people from Syria who were admitted under the Obama orders were Christians. Most of them were Muslim.
There is a lot of pushback, Congressman, and you're going to hear it as chairman of the Subcommittee on Immigration in the days ahead, from not only the Catholic Church but other communities. They're saying this is not living out the gospel. You have to welcome these refugees, and you shouldn't be separating these families that are seeking a better way of life. You would say what to those religious leaders?
Well, Matthew 25 says we're supposed to welcome the stranger. I think the Lord was saying the person who knocks on your door rather than the one who breaks into your house.
So you'll leave it there.
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about all of the pro-life legislation that's been moving. Well, not legislation, the pro-life executive orders so far. Do they go far enough? The president restored the Mexico City policy. You all in Congress, as we are talking with Congresswoman Black in the next segment, you all extended the Hyde Amendment under law. What's next? Is that enough?
Does it go far enough? No. I think we ought to redefine abortion, which I think Roe versus Wade allows us to include a bill that prohibits abortions after 20 weeks. I'm in favor of having a mandatory ultrasound so that the woman can see the human being that's actually in her womb. And As far as the Mexico City policy is concerned, I'd like to codify that too, because the Hyde Amendment prohibits the direct payment of abortions domestically,
right,
but not internationally.
Why not?
Well, that's because we never could get a permanent Mexico City policy passed. So we've had the Mexico City policy when there's a Republican president, Reagan, 2 Bushes, now Trump, and the first day a Democratic president has been in office.
They reverse it.
They reverse it. You know, that ought to be permanent law too.
The president extended the Keystone Pipeline as well as the North Dakota Pipeline, the building and construction of that, this week by executive order. There's been a lot of critics, even in the EPA. So the president also, by executive order, shut down any public dissemination of information. A good idea? Or doesn't the taxpayer, shouldn't they know what these experts in a given agency think and the research being generated there?
Well, there was one environmental assessment of the Keystone XL pipeline that said that the new route of it posed no environmental damages. And Secretary Kerry and President Obama just ignored that advice. You know, the thing is that I think that people who work for the administration ought to advance the policies of the elected president and his administration rather than trying to tear them apart. And while there are some who would call Trump's order a gag order on the EPA, you know, the fact is that Donald Trump was chosen according to our Constitution to lead our government and in the executive branch for the next 4 years. People who work for the executive branch should support what the elected president said, or I think maybe they ought to start looking for another job.
You will no doubt be involved in the coming days as these Supreme Court nominees are vetted. The president is promising to appoint one next week, his first Supreme Court pick. By all reports, it looks like it could be Judge Thomas Hardiman. A good pick, a solid pick, in your estimation?
Both. Judge Hardiman is a colleague on the Third Circuit in Philadelphia with Trump's sister, who's also a job. That's one of the reasons why I think he's got the inside track. He will be less controversial than many of the other people who were on the list. But I think he is good and solid. And one of the reasons why many of my constituents and I voted for Donald Trump is that if Hillary was involved in filling Supreme Court seats, you know, the pro-life movement would be killed for good. The pro-life movement is an extremely important thing in advancing Judeo-Christian ethics, which unfortunately a lot of people have turned their back on. And the last administration had a war on religious liberty. You know, they said that religious liberty was only within the 4 walls of a place of worship. Any of us who are Christians, regardless of denomination, know that the Lord commanded us, you know, to go out and to do good works, like hospitals, like schools, like social service agencies, and we could go on and on and on. And those would ended up, if Obama and Hillary had had their way, being stripped of any kind of religious values in terms of exercising this ministry. And I think that that's outrageous.
I want to get back to the Supreme Court picks. You have Senator Schumer, your minority leader, Nancy Pelosi. They have committed to fight against these nominees to the Supreme Court. Is there anything they can do to block these nominees, given the Reid rule? And to explain to people what that is.
Well, the Reid rule, or the so-called nuclear option, said that executive branch nominees for judges and for executive branch agencies could not be filibustered except for the Supreme Court, which still requires 60 votes. There are 48 Democratic and Democratic-leaning independent senators. So unless Mitch McConnell expands the nuclear option to include the Supreme Court, they can block any nominee that President Trump makes. Mitch McConnell, you know, ought to make the rule consistent and say that a Supreme Court nominee can be confirmed with 51 votes.
You think he'll do that?
That's up to him. I hope and pray so.
Congressman Sensenbrenner, thank you for being
Thank
here.
you,
We will
Raymond.
be in touch
Yeah.
in the days ahead, and thank you for making the time.
Yeah, thank you much.
In addition to the previously mentioned executive orders, President Trump signed others touching on health care reform and funding for abortions abroad. Here to unpack those executive orders and the bill that passed the House this week is the chairman of the House Budget Committee and a registered nurse, Tennessee Congresswoman DIANE BLACK. Welcome to the program.
You're welcome.
I want to start with Obamacare. Early on, Speaker Ryan and the President Trump, said there would be a simultaneous repeal and replace of Obamacare. Your Budget Committee is going to have a lot to say with how this ends up in the form it takes. Will we see a simultaneous repeal and replace?
I think what you will see is that we will replace pieces of it, one piece at a time. You're not going to have a big comprehensive bill, as was the Affordable Care Act.
Why not?
Obviously, that doesn't work. When you have a piece of legislation that is that large, it's just unwieldy, and that's really not the best way for the American people. So us doing it piece by piece, and what I want to be sure that people understand is we're not going to let people fall off the cliff, that we're going to have an opportunity to be able to bring a soft landing. The other thing is that all of this doesn't necessarily have to be done by legislation. Some of this can be done by hopefully Chairman Price, once he is confirmed, that he'll be able to do an HHS with his authority there. And if you read the Affordable Care Act, you will see how much the Secretary is really able to do, and it's quite a bit. So between the two working, we're going to get a better system that's more affordable, more choices.
Let's talk about all these plans swirling out there, and there are a number of them, including one that then Congressman Price put forward.
That's right.
You've got the American Health Care Reform Act. You've got Tom Price's Empowering Patients First Act. You've got the Patients' Choice Act. What piece? Those are three different plans. What do they have in common, and what do you think the final replace will look like? What will be the common or bullet points that we can expect to see?
So let's talk about the things that are the most onerous right now.
Okay.
And what's most onerous right now is the increase in premiums, the increase in deductibles. The president said if you like your plan, you can keep it. We know that a lot of people lost their plan. As a matter of fact, in the state of Tennessee, 28,000 people lost their plan in one day because it didn't meet all of the dictates of Obamacare. And so we want to look at those things that are hurting people the most, and that's what we want to deal with. And you can do that, as I say, in various ways, but you really have to get the real repeal piece in there so you can actually start giving some relief to people by putting new systems in that are patient-centered, that go out into the marketplace and actually allow the marketplace to work, to have some different products, not things the government says you need, but what do people say they need? What can they afford? That's what we want to do.
So certainly no mandates. Certainly health savings accounts will be encouraged.
That's one, yes.
What else? Medicaid block grants to the states, letting the states sort of take control of the health care for those beneath the poverty line or at poverty line or the working poor. Is that the vision?
That is one of the ideas that's there, and it's a very good idea because governors will tell you what works best in their state. As a matter of fact, our leadership sent a letter out, a survey out to governors all the way across the country and said, if you had the opportunity to change things, what would you do? What would you want? I had the opportunity to be with my governor this last weekend and ask him about how he filled the survey out. And I actually read his survey prior to meeting with him. And each state is different, and it would like to have the opportunity to be able to take care of the people in their state with patient-centered care to the best that they can provide for their
There is a plan that was unveiled in the Senate, and under this vision, this just happened this week, they would like to see the states take control of health care, but it would allow some of these Affordable Care Act models to stay in place. Would you favor that approach?
If the governor of that state decided that the pieces of the Affordable Care Act were working best for them and that's what they wanted, but remember, they're going to get an X number of dollars, and they will have to determine what's best for their state. And some governors may make that choice, and other governors may say, we want the competition in the free market.
During the appointed HHS Secretary's hearing, he hasn't been confirmed yet, but this is the Trump designee, Tom Price said he couldn't answer the question when he was asked if people would lose health care through this new plan. Is that a concern for you, that people might lose their care, and might they?
I think that I didn't hear what he had to say, so it's awfully difficult for me, because I think there may have been some context around that that might make it better for me to understand what he was saying. But again, we are going to have a system that will put into place patient-centered care using the marketplace, where there will be a lot of different products out there that people can use. Not just one product, but a myriad of products.
People will be able to
choose.
to shop across state borders.
Well, yeah, what works best for me? You know, my family may need something totally different. My family may be very healthy and an HSA works well for them. Or you may have another family that has a lot of healthcare needs and their plan is going to look a little different. I do want to point you to, back in our State Farm Bureau, who is an association, so they didn't have to abide by all the regulations that were in the mandate. They now are being just flooded with people wanting to talk with them because they have affordable plans that meet the needs of what people are actually wanting. And they are having folks every day call them to say, we want your plan, we can afford it, and you have what we want.
This week, Congress did something we've never seen. They extended the Hyde Amendment. Now, tell, for viewers who don't understand, this was basically a rider to appropriation bills year after year after year after year.
Yes.
This is now a piece of independent law. What does this mean? What does it do that we didn't have in place before?
Well, the Hyde Amendment prohibits dollars being used for abortion, taxpayer dollars. And what would happen is every year they would put it as a rider on the appropriations bill in the labor HHS appropriations function. And what that did is it covered just what was in that particular function. It didn't cover all of federal government. And what this bill will do is it will actually cover all of federal government. And so it will also make it permanent, because each year when you have to come back to pass this Hyde bill, Hyde Amendment, even though we've had good bipartisan support over the 40 years that this has been done, there's less and less of that happening. And so this gives us an assurance. It puts stability there, and it allows the taxpayers to know that their dollars are not going to be used for funding abortion.
What do you make of that, the passing of that bill? Now it goes to the Senate, of course, but I presume the president would sign this. In one of his first executive orders, he reinstated the Mexico City policy, which forbids any federal funds supporting organizations, non-governmental organizations, that promote abortions or provide them abroad.
Abroad, that's right.
Given those two pieces, just in the first week, is this the most pro-life administration, Congress that you've seen or been a part of?
At least I've been a part of, and I don't know, because I haven't been a part of a lot of other administrations, but I'm almost giddy by what we're able to do. As a matter of fact, people that are pro-life and pro-choice both agree that taxpayer dollars, 6 out of 10 people will agree that this is not the appropriate use of our tax dollars. And so this is something that, again, has been bipartisan, and I'm really delighted that we're able to get it to where we are today and hopefully get it to the president's desk so he will sign it.
One of the big controversies of the week, the president and his spokesman reaffirmed President Trump believes millions of undocumented people, illegal immigrants, voted in the last election. Do you share that belief?
I don't have the documentation to actually say, and so I'm always one of those folks that you got to show me. I'm not from the Missouri state, but I am a show me kind of girl. I do think that this needs to be looked at, and we hear cases that are anecdotal, but we don't really know for sure. And I do think that is something we have to be aware of, that we're only having people that are bona fide citizens that are electing our leaders. It's important.
Congresswoman Black, thank you so much for being here.
You're
We
so
hope you'll
welcome.
come back soon.
I'll do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that is all the time we have until next week. The show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com, as is our Will Wilder bookmark giveaway. And be sure to tune in next week. We'll take a closer look at the president's U.S. Supreme Court pick and much more. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.